Yeah, nice big welcome to all of you for joining us today. This is the second time that Dominique and I have run this event, which we're loving. And if you haven't been before, it's really just a space that we wanted to create where we could join our minds together and hang out and speak about things that we're really passionate about, but also create a space where we have like-minded people coming together to connect, especially if you are a teacher of yoga. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Kate.
Hey.
Hi.
So that we can connect, ask questions, deepen our practice, and just have community. You know, I think in this last couple of years, everybody would agree that remaining connected to community is essential for well-being. So this is an ongoing thing that we will be doing, and we're just going to be exploring different topics each time. So Dominique can speak to this in a moment of her background in Ayurveda, but today we're sort of joining forces in our collective knowledge of Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine around what does winter mean? What do the texts say about winter? How might that influence our self-care, our yoga practice, and what kind of concepts come up in both Ayurveda and TCM that might be really interesting for us to dive into today. So that's really the topic for today. So as most of you probably know, I'm now a qualified Chinese medicine practitioner, but I do have a love of Ayurveda, which started by learning it from Dominique at AYA when I was doing my training. And we've always had these conversations over the years of, what does Ayurveda say about this? Or what's TCM's version of that? Where do these systems that are very, very related, where do they have parallels? Where do they have intersection? Where do they have differences of opinion? And we love these conversations, and we think you will too. So that's kind of what I bring to the party, as well as my love of yin yoga and how those two things connect. And I might hand it over to Dominique, who can speak about what she's bringing to the party today.
Hello everyone, and everyone who's watching this after the fact. So I'm very much still a student of Ayurveda and hope to always be as such. But I've been studying it pretty seriously for at least 15 years now, and the more I study, the more I learn. Just like with any other complex system, the more I actually am humbled and realize how far I've got to go. So yeah, I was really lucky to be able to study in India and under some really amazing, well-respected teachers. And one of the great things to have come from the last couple of years and being in lockdown is that I've reconnected with one of my main teachers, Dr. Robert Svoboda. So you might hear me referencing either Tuaraji, who's that glorious man behind me in the picture frame, who's one of my teachers. You might hear me referencing Svoboda. Yeah, and it's been really lovely to start working with Karina on these conversations. And to the best of my knowledge, Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine actually share ancestry. So there are a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap there. There's some difference there, and it's just really great to be able to riff off of Karina, because we've got such a good relationship and rapport where we can respectfully disagree on some things, and it prompts us both to go away, educate ourselves, come back, and it's really rare in this day and age to have relationships like that, I find. So whenever I do connect with someone, who's going to respectfully push me and encourage me to grow and go outside what I think I know, I'm just super grateful for that. So yeah, here we are. So would you, Karina, like me to start off just talking a little bit about what Ayurveda says about winter?
Yeah,
Okay.
just before you do, I'd love to add into what you just said before about the kind of the genesis of these paradigms of health. And I don't know the exact timelines, but I always found it really cool to think about if you've got sort of India and China like this, and then you've got the Middle East over there, depending on how you can see me on my screen, that when the Silk Road opened, which you've got, you know, the Middle East and China above and India, Nepal below, when that opened, my understanding is that so much trade happened between all of these different places. So they might have had their own customs and cultures when it came to medicine and even shamanism and how they thought about spirituality. But then once there was an open line of traffic, there was a lot of trade. So the Indians might have been going into China and vice versa and saying, how do you treat colds and flus? We grow this herb in the mountain. Can we exchange this herb for something that you're using for gynecology or supporting fertility? So there are so many similarities, and there has been so much, I guess, what would you call it? Like a collective collab between all of these places with how we help support humans in their health. And so it's hard to say who brought what, because I think that there's been a big blend of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And even prior to the Silk Road, when Alexander the Great invaded the Indus Valley, the Greeks took a lot. You know, that caduceus symbol is actually, that's Ida and Pingala circling their way up Shushumna. So there's definitely been a lot of cross-pollination, but absolutely, Karina, once that Silk Road opened, those three main points, China, the Middle East, and India, there was a beautiful melting pot happening in there. But one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time over probably about the last 5 to 7 years thinking about is, okay, a lot of, and I'm not sure if you find this in TCM, Karina, but certainly in Ayurveda, the texts, the three original texts that we referred to were written from the perspective of India or Pakistan, and written a very, very long time ago. And even the contemporary textbooks, you know, by the likes of David Frawley, Vasant Lad, Svoboda, they're wonderful because they bring some of this ancient perspective into modern times. But again, they're written through the lens of someone that is in the Northern Hemisphere. And so what I found especially frustrating was was looking at the Ayurvedic Wheel of the Year, for example, and then trying to relate that to Melbourne, because we can have 17 seasons in one day. And so what I have that I will email you guys at the end of this session together is something that I've spent a really long time putting together, and it's the Ayurvedic Wheel of the Year for Melbourne. And it's important to remember when you are looking at online articles, when you are reading information from, you know, some really amazing people, just to keep it at a little bit of an arm's length. And remember that what's actually most important, and I love it, Svoboda often says this, what is the reality of where you are? What is the reality of where you are in terms of the wheel and the cycle of your own life? Because that is the way that your body is, the way that your hormones are when you're 17 is very different to how they are when you're 47, is very different to how they'll be when you're 77. So what's the reality of where you are in your life cycle right now? And the other thing that I love about Ayurveda and all of the traditional healing arts is the focus on connecting with nature. So what is the reality of where you are, literally geographically of where you are? Because winter in Melbourne is very different from winter in the Northern Territory. So now you can allow that to be really frustrating and sort of start to feel a bit overwhelmed by that, which is never really helpful. or you can, this is the approach that I take, that I'm right now finding to be really useful. Strip it down. Don't get bogged in the weeds of the doshas and the this and the that, but rather strip it down and have a look at what are the inherent qualities of where you are in your own life, in your own physiology and physicality, and what is actually going on in the world outside you, and let that be your principal guide. And so that's what I'd like to talk to today, is about some of those qualities, and riff off Karina. How's everyone feeling about that? Yeah, good. Okay. So according to my calculations, here in Melbourne and in Australia, winter actually consists of 3 mini seasons, or 3 definitive segments that we go through. The first is what we will refer to as early winter. And early winter kicks in about mid-May, and it's always about. Yeah, so this is the other great thing. Well, I find it really liberating. If we're going to be working with an Ayurvedic mindset, you need to throw out your calendar and throw out what the calendar says about the seasons, and be responsible for connecting with what's actually going on. So somewhere around mid-May, we kick into early winter. And that early winter season lasts for about 6 weeks, till around mid-June, which is where we also have winter solstice, which we've just had on the 21st of June. And that's where we really sort of enter into that mid-winter cycle. So the mid-winter cycle lasts from about mid-June to about mid-August. Then something really interesting happens about mid-August through to the period around the spring equinox on the 21st of September. So when you're looking at connecting with we'll call it the celestial and the elemental influences at work, it's helpful to know when the equinoxes and the solstices, I think that's the plural, I'll go with that. It's helpful to know when they fall. And I also find it really useful to keep an eye on what the moon is doing, because you'll often find that the new moons and full moons, even when you're looking during the day at what's going on in the world around you, when you're taking your dog out for a walk or whatever you're doing, you might start to notice, as I have, that around the new moon and around the full moon, that's when these seasonal markers start to sort of make themselves more apparent in the natural world. You might notice around new moon, for example, you might notice around new moon in May that there are a couple of super windy days around that period. So whenever the wind really picks up wherever you are, you know that that is about to usher in a shift in the atmosphere. So I certainly noticed about mid-May this year, where I am, that there were a few days of sometimes pretty scary winds. Actually, it knocked the power out a few times where I live, and sure enough, a week later we were all shivering. And winter had arrived. So it's beautiful, because we know, and I'm sorry, I didn't even ask if anyone has any experience or background in Ayurveda. I can only assume that people are interested, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But my point is that anyone who knows anything about Ayurveda knows that wind equals vata. Yeah, and vata literally means that which moves. And it's that combination of the elemental forces of space and wind, that's responsible for all movement in the world around us and in the world within us. So whenever you have a couple of really windy days, at those interseasonal junctures, it's beautiful to connect with that, is part of my point, to pay attention to what's going on, so that you can start to develop a relationship with the elements. And what's much more important than getting bogged down in Vikriti and Prakriti and doshas, and because it's very easy to get bogged down in those details. What's more important is to focus on relationship and making a connection with the elements. So early winter from about mid-May to about mid-August. Now, what's happening mid-May through mid-June? What's happening in early winter is that there's an increase in cold. Depending on where you are in Australia, there's an increase in damp and or an increase in dry. And the energies are descending. Yeah, they're moving in and down. Ayurveda, I think not dissimilar to TCM, but Karina will speak to this. It separates the year into two halves. There's the yin half of the year, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and the yang half of the year. I've got another graphic that I'll email you guys through that makes a little bit more sense of this. But essentially, in the yin half of the year, all of our energy is moving inward, because that's where all of the focus needs to be. Winter, according to Ayurveda, is a time for us to focus our attention in on ourselves, not just our literal physical body, but also our mental and emotional well-being, which is really different to the yang part of the year, where everything's sort of ascending and radiating, and it's really appropriate to focus our attention and our energy on what's going on outside. The yin energy, and winter is about what's happening yin side. Sorry, bad joke. And that first part of winter is all about that descent. So it means that that pitta dosha, or the hot fiery elements, actually get relocated, if you like, and pushed deep down into the body. So many people experience an increase in appetite in early winter, and we do have an increase in Agni. So Agni is, the word Agni just means fire, and Jatara Agni is our digestive fire. So there is an increase in our Jatara Agni, and we are better able to digest slightly heavier, slightly more oily foods. Now, of course, this is all assuming that your digestion is already regulated. So let me just put a little caveat in here, very important. If you have any underlying issues with your digestion, that needs to be made a priority to get that regulated. Yeah. So providing your digestion is pretty good, or if you have a natural affinity toward pitta like I do, you find yourself feeling much hungrier in early winter. And it's important to eat when you're hungry. In early winter and in midwinter, your body is laying down tissue. You're literally creating more dhatu, more of the tissue element in the body. So interesting, if you, like me, follow intermittent fasting, or occasionally you like to do ketogenic type diets, winter is the time to step away from that. There's no one thing that's suitable for everyone to do all of the time. And certainly, in fact, if you want to get the best results from your intermittent fasting and your ketogenic diets, it's a good idea just to step away from them for a bit, because if we put ourselves into that catabolic state during winter, it can actually really disturb vata dosha. Yeah. And it's just not what the body is trying to do in winter. We're sending deep nourishment to the tissues, laying down new tissues. it's helpful, I find, to think of winter as the time where we are nourishing our root system and putting down new tissue in the root system to better support our upward trajectory come spring. Yeah. So provided you are, and this is again the big proviso, provided you are able to digest them well, early winter and midwinter is a great time to start incorporating more good fats in your diet. Lots of sesame oil, lots of ghee, increase protein, and of course, making sure that you're consuming food and beverages that are really watery, especially if you're in a dry climate or if Vata dosha tends to be an issue for you, which will be as you get older, please trust me. Making sure that, when you cook grains, for example, cook them in a little bit more water than you ordinarily would, or have soupier type preparations. So that's all great stuff to do in early to mid winter. One of the things that I want to just talk to before I hand it over to Karina, because I'm cognizant that I've just been yapping away, sorry. One of the things that's really interesting is that many people are under the mistaken idea that during winter, because it's cold and because it's heavy, that we should be stoking kapha, that we should be stoking our energy and doing lots of things like dry skin brushing and intense exercise and Surya Bedana and things to get kapha dosha moving. Has anyone else encountered that advice along the way? Yeah. Not now, not yet. Yeah, there is a time for that, but that time has not arrived yet. Early winter and midwinter, so early winter, the energies are descending. Midwinter, the energy is circulating very slowly. It gives the appearance of stillness, but what prana is doing in the body is moving very slowly, hopefully through the bones and through the bone marrow. So any excessive activity or excessive heat or things that are super stimulating, like, as I say, dry skin brushing, not useful, not helpful. Ayurveda suggests that we work with nature rather than pushing against it. The time for all of that kapha pacifying action will come mid-August through to mid-September in what is called the cold season. Yeah, so in Ayurveda, that period has a name and an energy all of its own. And you might notice if you look back, hopefully with clear recollection and objectivity, you might notice that that period from mid-August to mid-September, even though the calendar says it's springtime, it actually gets a hell of a lot colder in Melbourne and wetter in Melbourne. Yeah. And that is such a beautiful example of, just dealing with the reality of what's actually going on outside. So things get colder and things get wetter, and we move from a space where the energy was quite still, but still circulating very slowly through the bones and the bone marrow, to then the energy starting to move and some gentle friction starting to occur in the system. And that's when we want to take steps to mitigate kapha dosha. And to encourage that movement. So if you're into the intermittent fasting, the time to get back into that will be sort of toward the end of August. Yes, I think I've spoken enough. Unless anyone has any questions just on what I've said, I'll hand it over to Karina.
Did anyone want to ask questions? There's a lot of really juicy stuff in there. Before I lay over the top of that a Chinese medicine perspective, and then your brains will be like this.
No questions. Just, I think it just makes sense. What you're saying makes perfect sense. And it also, like, from a mood point of view, and an eating and a mood, emotional state, I think, it's fairly accurate what you're saying, because how we feel in those times, and it varies with age. I think as one gets older, I think that wanting to go inward is kind of I think we're led a little bit more by the elements as we grow older. I feel that. I don't know whether it's an age thing. I mean, I should talk to the younger people in the room, but I just think, I just feel as though it is. Maybe I'm not right.
Beautiful. Well, I see you've got your hand up, Kate. Just hang on one second. Athena, you're spot on. One of the things that happens as we move through our life cycle and as we become, let's say, less young, as we become less young and move through our life cycle, Vata dosha gets more and more of a hold on our systems, because that's just part of that aging process, is taking on more of the qualities of Vata, and you become more sensitive. And I like to think part of the aging process is also part of reconnecting with what matters. It's entirely appropriate when you're a teenager to be concerned with childlike things, let's say, but then as we get older, that's part of that cyclical growth and development that happens. So that's spot on what you're saying. Kate, you had a question?
Yeah, when you were talking about that, it popped into my mind. Would you say that, like, does it get described in either of your disciplines that there's a yang and a yin part of life? Because I feel like, exactly like Athena and yourself, that I'm moving into a yin part of my life where I'm coming from a completely different headspace. And
yeah, I'll answer just quickly on Ayurveda's from Ayurveda's perspective and hand it over to Karina. Ayurveda takes us in, interestingly enough, a circle from yin through yang and back to yin. And according to yoga and Ayurveda, physical life is very much a yin thing. The natural world is, and Prakriti, nature herself, that's a yin, that's a yin thing. Yeah. And so what happens, again, this is just according to the science of Ayurveda. When we are born, the period from birth through to teenagehood is dominated by Kapha dosha. And Kapha is very yin. It has all of the qualities of yin. It's and when you look at the qualities of a young child, and if you and this is perfect, Melissa, for you to take in some of this information. When you look at young children, they are Kapha dosha personified. They're smooth. They're mucousy. they're putting on tissue. That is, that's entirely appropriate to that period from birth till teenagehood. Is all about putting on earth element, and Ayurveda says or sees things through a prism of borrowing elements from the earth. Whilst we're alive, we borrow elements to add to our physicality, and then we hand them back over when we become pranically challenged at the end of the cycle. Once we hit the teenage years, then it's time for Pitta dosha and that yang to kick in. And again, it's entirely appropriate from your teenage years through to your mid-30s. Okay, these are approximate, but you can sort of see them there at play if you stand back and look at it dispassionately. From your teenage years through to your mid-30s, it's entirely appropriate for there to be lots of transformation, lots of heat, and you're out there putting your stamp on the world. Yeah, very yang. And then once you reach the peak of that, Vata takes over, and you're still actually moving in this direction. You're moving. You're very much once the mid-30s, early 40s are gone. You're very much moving back to source. So it's not as heavy and tissue based as early life, but it's back to that more soft, spacious yin quality. Karina, what does TCM say about that? Great question, guys.
Yeah. I feel like there's a few different ways that I could go with that, because I think it's nice to be reminded as well, especially from a Chinese med perspective, that yin and yang are these, I guess if you were to boil down the manifest world into its dualistic nature, you could place all things in either the category of yin or yang, because that's the nature of duality, right? You've got to have these opposing forces. We talk a lot in Chinese medicine about yin and yang in the body as being these components of the body itself. So the yin is the material. So like Dominique was saying, it's the tissue, it's the stuff of your body. And those of you that have done the yin training with me, we talk a lot about that, because the yin tissues tend to be the ones that are the densest, the least elastic, the ones that are a little bit tougher. And then the yang is the action, it's the fire, it's the transformation of things. So it's the yang that illuminates or activates the yin. So without any of that fire or that activity, yin is inert and stagnant and has no life. But if you don't have any substance to draw from, then the yang has nothing to make it manifest in the first place. So I guess from more of a clinician perspective, when we're thinking about yin and yang in the body, as you age, there's a decline in both. So I would sort of see younger people as being more yang in the fact that they're active, but they've got a lot of yin and substance. Hopefully they've got good blood, they've got healthy bones and teeth. Their bank account is full. Their trust fund is full. And then as we age, we're withdrawing from that with everything that we do. If we are creating life, if we're growing babies in our bodies, if we are exerting ourselves a lot physically, mentally, emotionally, which we all will do. Some people do that harder and faster than others. Then we're going to be consuming both yin and yang. So for somebody who lives a really hard and fast life, you might see them in their 40s or 50s. It might become really, really obvious just by observing somebody that they have spent a lot. You know, they've had that credit card out, swiping away all their life, so to speak. And then someone who's just taken their time, you know, the tortoise to the hare, they might spend a little bit more wisely, and they might age a little bit more gracefully, just as some examples of how we see that. And we look at, and this is a nice sort of circle back to what TCM thinks about winter, because in wintertime, I don't know of any kind of 3 mini seasons, although there probably could be. The overall encouragement in wintertime is that we are, going with the season. So a lot of what we wanted to really have as a takeaway today is that regardless of doshas, regardless of terms and paradigms and dogmas, really the most important thing is to start creating more awareness of self and awareness of the environment and how it affects you. This idea in winter is that if we're paying attention to what goes on outside, maybe you live in North China where the cold is much more of a big deal than it is in Northern Territory. But if you're paying attention to the outside and you're witnessing, okay, at what time of the day is the sun coming up now? At what time is the sun setting? What is it windy outside? Is it cold? How do I need to address that so that my body stays within those nice, healthy parameters of being nourished and homeostatic? So if you're paying attention to that, then winter is saying, hey, you could sleep a bit more. Wouldn't be a bad idea to eat a bit more. This is the time of the year that you replenish. And my language around that is usually, this is when you're building reserves. Because even though we've been through lockdowns and we've all had our own personal experience of being slowed down, going with that and embracing it, or really fighting against it, everybody's had a change to the way they've functioned. Now is the interesting time where things are lifting and people are returning. It's like, okay, how do you want to re-enter? Are you just going to re-enter and crack the whip again the way we always were conditioned to do? Because winter is saying, hey, you can't be a yang ball all year round. If you don't replenish your stock, like Dominique was saying before, then when, spring comes, or there's that emergence of a rising up of prana and chi, what are you drawing from? How well did you stock your pantry? How's your blood? How's your body? Did you fast all winter time and you've lost a ton of body fat, and maybe you start to feel really dry in springtime, or there is repeated injuries, or there's dryness and thirst, or a real agitation of what I would call vata, where there's anxiety and insomnia and just a feeling of restlessness. So the kind of, the overall arching idea in wintertime from Chinese medicine is that you kind of go to ground. And the organs that we talk about are the kidneys. And like Dominique was saying before, with that inward and downward movement, we see that as being the kind of kidney chi movement in the body. And the kidneys are really supported with the correct amount of salt. And salt is a downward mineral. It'll go down. Goldilocks, though, not too much, not too little. But we need that salt to hold the balance of fluid in the body so that tissues are actually hydrated. And eat a little bit more. Eat a little bit more of those richer foods. So we're always talking about, this is the time of the year where you make your bone broth, or you get out the slow cooker, more soups and stews. And I found it very interesting what Dominique was saying before about Agni, fire, digestive fire. One of the big things that we bang on about all the time is cold, consuming cold, how cold affects the body. So there's a whole text in Chinese medicine called the Shanghan Lun, and it's considered to be classical Chinese medicine. That's, if you practice according to the Shanghan Lun, you are doing classical Chinese medicine. And the whole book is about how cold damages the body and how it moves through all the different layers of the body. So let's say, for example, you're out in the morning and it's a little bit cold and windy, and you go for a walk and you get a what we would call a wind cold invasion. Cold enters the body. There'll be a series of symptoms that affect the body first, and that might be something like a little bit of thirst, a stiff neck. You might have a headache, a runny nose. Like we would just call that, I think I'm getting a cold. But this entire textbook basically chronicles how that cold can move through all the different layers of the body and how it transforms. And so then you've got these really set Chinese herbal formulas and acupuncture points to expel and push that cold back out. So to the Chinese, cold is the devil. And you can see that in the older Chinese community. They don't drink cold water. They don't eat raw salads. They have a thermos of hot water and they're sipping hot water before and after meals, because they know. They might not know why, but they know that that's how you do things. That's how you prevent illness. So one of the things that can really get in the way of what winter is trying to do for us is if in wintertime we are consuming really cold foods and cold drinks, because you're basically pouring water over that Agni. And as the Agni is trying to transform things and turn it into those tissues in the body and lay down reserve, you're squashing it. And unfortunately, I mean, this is what I see in clinic. I reckon 8 out of 10 people that come into clinic have got digestive issues and have had digestive issues for ages. And that might not be from consuming cold foods, but I mean, there's a whole rabbit warren we could go down with that, but we have an abundance of things available at all times. We're not all connected with what to eat when. And even if we are, there's so much choice. It's so easy to go, I know I should be having my root veggies and my pumpkin and making soup, but I kind of want some blueberries in there, so I'm going to get them. Or some watermelon, or I'm going to have some yogurt at the times of the year where the body says, this is not local seasonal food that the outside world is saying to consume according to what you need to be in line with nature. And we eat way too much sugar. I'm guilty of it. We eat doing something else at the same time. Eat while we're driving. We eat while we're on the computer. We eat while we're scrolling. We eat on the phone. So there's a split in our attention as to how the body is actually digesting. because we're using up energy to do other things. There's a whole conversation that could be had around digestion. But if digestion is super important in winter, then yeah, there's definitely food for thought, pun intended, on how we start to develop that relationship with self. Something that I offer people that go, oh my gosh, that's me, is to think about having one God meal a day. One meal a day where you don't do anything else when you're eating. You just sit and quietly, it might be a snack, might be a cup of tea, where you just quietly sit and all of your attention and focus is just on having that little meal, not conversing, not driving, not eating over the sink in a rush to get out the door, and just notice how that makes you feel. So I try and do that every day. I don't get it done every day, but I do try, and it does make a difference. There are a couple other things I wanted to speak to. Digestive issues. What else did I say? Yeah, times of the year. So we kind of see it more like summer is the pinnacle of yang, and autumn and spring are these pivot seasons. So if summer's up here and it's outward and it's vibrant and it's lifted and it's, it's more connected, there's more Shen, then autumn is this pivot of, okay, now we're going in, we're turning in, and then we're moved down into winter. And then spring is that pivot of, oh, now we're coming back up. You watch all of the buds sprouting in springtime, and they're telling you chi begins to move up, and then we return to summer. So if that's the case, the best thing that we can be doing for ourselves is paying attention to the gross signs and the more subtle signs of how we're being moved, and give ourselves permission to go with that. And it is difficult in this society because, and I've said this tons before, you've probably heard me say it if you've done training with me, society very much conditions us to be yang all year round. Work the same hours, produce the same amount of work, to be as connected to your social groups, to kind of just almost like be a rebellion against nature, that there's no grace for being in tune with nature. And if you are somebody that is attuned to nature, society doesn't really kind of get that. You might be a problem in the workplace. You might be a hippie. You might be, I don't know what you might be, but it's not encouraged. And yet the further that we are in discord with nature, the more stuff happens in the body. And it's almost like we're not allowed to take care of it. And it can be really frustrating. I don't know, maybe that's why we are attracted to things like yoga or different careers that allow for that, because we know that that's healthy and it creates better conditions for ease in the body. What do people think about that? I know I just said a mouthful of different things. Does that resonate? Does anything stand out just there? People have left.
Well done, Karina. I really, when you were talking about how TCM system sort of looks at cold as being the devil, in Ayurveda, what am I trying to say? Come on, Dominique. In Ayurveda, the number one rule, let's say, is to avoid extremes. Yeah, so we're always looking to avoid extremes, because and avoid drama. Yeah, because what that does is disturb Vata. And Vata dosha is there moving Pitta and moving Kapha. Vata is, I had an amazing teacher in India who used to quite often say that working with Vata is like living with a poisonous snake in your house. You always want to know where it is. Right? You can't get rid of it. It lives there. But you always sort of want to have an eye on it, because once it gets disturbed, once it gets away from you, it's like trying to catch the wind. This is another thing she used to say. It's like trying to catch the wind in a butterfly net. It's very, very hard to control it. So best course of action is just to always have an eye on it and what's going on, and to avoid extremes. So making sure that your meals are well cooked and warm. And this time of year, just keep coming back to winter. This time of year, making sure that you're not drinking ice water. And on the one hand, we say it's a good time to eat heavier foods, and that's absolutely true. But there's a very big difference between a roasted sweet potato drizzled in sesame oil with salt and black pepper, and now I'm hungry, and a bowl of ice cream. Yeah. So perhaps now is a good time to maybe segue into some diet for the season. How do you guys feel about that? Yeah?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That sounds good. I just wanted to pick up that point that you made, Karina, about that idea about people around you feeling a little bit like you're a little bit not the norm if you are going inward, if you are making choices about particular foods, if you make note of those things. Yeah, I think there is a thing, there is a force around people. I do believe, I have seen it. I've certainly seen it. I mean, I work in schools, but in schools there's a lot of people who are a bit, I would like to say a bit more open-minded, because they are. I mean, I feel they are. And I'm in a very high Asian population. So we have a Chinese sister school. We've got lots of Chinese kids, and and yes, they all eat out of a thermos. You're absolutely right. Every day, all the kids eat out of a thermos. Very rare that I see a child with a sandwich, a cold sandwich. Quite common. But in a staff room conversation, there's people who are drawn to that. Oh, I want to know more about that. Or that's really interesting. I really like that idea. And there's almost like I sense a bit of a fear of stepping forward. It's like, oh, well, you're like that. I don't know if I can be like that. There is this sort of a little bit of a tension. I do feel it. And I don't think it's just workplaces, by the way. It's also in personal social circumstances. So, yeah, that resonated with me. I just wanted to make a point about that. And I think diet is a nice segue, because I think they're all relative, because we tend to eat socially rather than selfishly and independently. And in my Greek cultural background, food's very much a social, familial type thing. So, I think if we're going to move to food, that idea of that social element is really tricky, because, the choices you make about the food and who you eat it with and what choices of food there is. I mean, and I care for elderly parents. Karina knows this. I've spoken to her about it before. So, I support their meals, and, I help them make choices about better foods. And everything you're saying is very, very real. But that little point about, people feeling a little bit uncomfortable, or some people feeling uncomfortable, I don't think it's age specific either.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Athena. I'm not sure if you would agree with me, but this is something I can just put to the group. I definitely notice that in Australian culture, there's a sense of, if you're doing something a little bit different, other people, maybe this is just the people I've met in my travels, other people will often meet and call you out on it and almost like make a joke. Like, there's a lot of depreciating humor in this culture, as opposed to leading with curiosity and, oh, what are you eating? Oh, that's amazing. Good for you. You don't often get that. It's more like, what are you eating? Sweet potato, whatever, we're having chips. Like, it can be funny, but there can be a real vulnerability for you to honor something that you want to do for your health and be seen doing it, because it can be jarring for other people. And I've noticed that the way that other people, when they get jarred, respond is usually to kind of highlight you in a verbal way. And it's kind of like when you stop drinking so much. I used to work in hospitality, so I can say that I used to drink quite a bit. When you make a big change and other people around you notice and they're not making the change, often they can feel quite ruffled, like, oh, if you're making better changes for your health and I'm not, what does that say about me? And they might vocalize it, or they might make a bit of fun of you or have a little bit of a dig, because that's sort of Aussie culture. And so I think particularly in Australia, if you're someone who is really walking your talk and it can be seen, you can get a lot of attention that might make you uncomfortable unless you feel really, really solid in your decision making. And not everybody is. That can feel a little bit, I'll just do what other people are doing until I feel more confident.
You've just described the whole migrant experience of being the child who was eating salami, you know, in prep, and kids, you know. So I've got a lot of resilience around that. That's been a whole lifetime, but I agree with you. I actually do agree with that. I think that's part of the tall poppy syndrome. That I know that's a cliche term, but yeah, that's definitely a cultural thing. And I'm in a very multicultural workplace, so the kids, you know, it's not unusual for people to be different, or kids to be different, or teachers to be different. So it's kind of accepted. But I have been in schools that are very, very different, and it's definitely a culture. There's no doubt about it. Sorry, Kate, I'll cut you off. I think
you're right. I agree 100%. I mean, I come from a family that's got that mentality, very Aussie, and like I've always been looked at as a complete weirdo for a lot of my views. And I think aging, I love getting to a point in my life where I don't give two shits about what anybody thinks. It's the most empowering time. And, you know, I think that comes with age for everybody. But, yeah, so I spent my whole life trying to justify that I was okay when it was just this cultural thing. And for me, it was a familial thing. They were just like, you know, there's something wrong with you for thinking differently than we do. And I was going to say, you opened with when I first came in, it's totally cultural in Australia. Like they're agreeing to disagree. People get angry and they can't accept it. And I loved my time in Europe. I was there for about 10 years, and they had this beautiful curiosity, and you'd see best friends having this really heated argument on something they completely disagreed on, and then they'd be happy to never agree and still be great friends without any anger in that heat. It was just amazing. And Australian culture is really disappointing in that way, because I find people don't have the tolerance to explore someone else's personality, and I think it's come to the forefront in the last few years. Yeah, having a different point of view on certain things, and people feel threatened, and I've been silenced in the last few years in so many ways of, you know, a lot of my views. Like I haven't taken the vaccine, and I'm just like, people close to me, they're like, we don't want to hear it. They don't want to explore, like family people and friends from school. And yeah, so I really think that our culture, if you haven't stepped out of it, it's hard to see its existence.
If I can just riff on that, because it's really beautiful what everyone has just been sharing, and there's no doubt about it, we are in the midst of interesting times and culture wars in a way. And there's also, I'm an immigrant, and there's definitely they call it tall poppy syndrome. I think it's perfectly fitting, because anything that is sort of different to the herd is, and I'm speaking very generally because of course not everyone is like this, but anything that's different from the herd is sort of singled out and chopped down very, very quickly. And for me, I feel like that comes from a place of fear, because we are hardwired to connect and to fit in, you know, evolutionarily speaking. If we didn't do that 20,000 years ago, we'd be dead very quickly. And we need to connect, we need to fit in. So without getting into, or without, you know, professing to understand how and where or why that comes from, just to acknowledge that I completely agree, Athena and Kate, with those sentiments. And if I could turn us back to the concept of Ayurveda and the 3 different stages of life. Because what I was thinking while you guys were talking, it was such a brilliant conversation, was that in that first period of life during childhood, we're very much hardwired to connect and to really sort of be very closely attached to our parents and to our family. That's the primary sort of connection and attachment, and that's entirely appropriate and fitting. Then when we hit the Pitta stage of life in our teenage and early adulthood, we are very much wired to fit in with our peers, and with society. Again, very fitting, very appropriate. And then once we get past that Pitta stage into our late middle age and older, the part of the journey and the direction of connection is up and out, where we're going back to source. And so it's entirely fitting. And I'm also finding this to be true as I become less young. It is so liberating to no longer give a shit about the good opinions of other people. And so to tie that up, the point I'm trying to make is this any Ayurveda and TCM and any spiritual journey is about slowly becoming less incentivized by our connections with other people and with the mundane, even though there are periods of life where that's entirely appropriate and healthy. But as we become older, and as we become more focused on health and well-being and spirituality, that self-direction, self-orientation is just so important. And doing what we need to do for ourselves, coming back to Karina's original point, we might stand out at the workplace because we don't want to sort of be turning up for Friday night drinks every Friday night or saying yes to every extracurricular activity. But I think as we get older, we give less of a shit about that. I hope. And what I've noticed on this path is the more committed I am to my own health and well-being, even though especially that part of me that's a mum and a daughter and a woman, I have many, and there are legions living inside this tiny body, many of the personalities in there. One of those voices is sort of arcing up and saying, well, that's very selfish. You should be thinking about everyone else. But every step I take in the direction towards my own self-actualization and my own self-governance and self-care only sort of feels like a really solid step. So I just wanted to share that. I felt like during that conversation, there were all these amazing sort of pieces dropping in, and I'm going to shut up now and hand it over to Karina. Sorry.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you so much for everything that people have just shared in that juicy midsection of today's chat. I think that in essence, this part of the conversation was really dialing into what we hoped would be a takeaway, which is to come back to self, regardless of the time of the year or what's going on. This idea of using the world as our curriculum so that we can get to know ourselves better, get to know, hey, what works for me? What doesn't work for me? Can I inch ever closer to feeling solid in connecting with my own intuitive wisdom about what I know I need to do, even if there's someone externally that doesn't get it, or they're making different decisions for themselves that I know are not great for them. That's okay. Can I hand that back to them and just really pay attention to what I know I need to do in all realms, whether it's, I know how I feel when I eat certain things. I know how I feel when I go to bed early. So I know that if I go to bed late, I'm going to feel a certain way, but I'm aware of that. So I'm making conscious decisions about myself because I've taken all of my experiences on board from the past, and I'm integrating them so that I can make the best decisions for me quietly. I don't have to proclaim it. I don't have to get on Instagram and tell everybody what I'm doing. I can if I want, but I don't have to. And I can just quietly have my own little revolution. And I think when people are doing that, and it sounds like we're all doing that, other people do pay attention. And whether they get their back up or they get jarred or they react in a way that's not favorable, it is having an impact because you are leading by example. And you know, when you're making those decisions that are really good for you, you feel expanded and you feel connected. And like Dominique said, you feel like you're kind of on solid ground. You feel like you're setting up good foundations for self. And that feeling is really all you need to go by in my experience, that feeling of expanded, solid, tall, shoulders back, regardless of what the rest of the world is saying I should be doing, is very different to a shrinking or a contraction or a feeling of being unsure, or I really knew what I needed to do and now this person said something and it's totally thrown me. So I'm gonna second guess myself and I'll just kind of abandon what I was gonna do and just do what they're doing because it's easy. Does that resonate with anyone?
Absolutely. In fact, sorry, there was just an explosion of cuteness that happened at Melissa's house. Hello. Hello. Hi. Sorry, something I just wanted to say before I forget. I love what you just said, Karina. Thank you so much. I've been working for a while now with this concept of alignment, and it started with alignment in asana, and it's changed. My idea of what that means to be aligned is very different, let's say now, to what it was 10 years ago. And now, because I'm more aligned with the concept, I'm starting to actually see, when I reconnect with my teachers and my texts, that this is actually what Ayurveda and I think TCM and all of the ancient healing systems are all about. It's about getting back into alignment, alignment with nature's cycles. So the cycle of the sun, alignment with the cycles of the moon, with the cycles of the season. And the point I'm making in my very long-winded way, I'm sorry, is that the more you are living in alignment with your values and what is keeping you healthy and on track, what I'm finding is that the more I do that, every step I take into alignment with these cycles and with myself, I am less inclined to be swayed or concerned with anything else that's going on around me. So it doesn't, because it used to come very much, I'm gonna swear, so Melissa, cover little ears, oh, she's gone. In the past, this was coming from a very FU space, that very teenage, immature, Dominique type space. But now those behaviors and those choices, it's not about, sticking it to my parents or my peers, but it's about, I actually really want this for myself and it feels good, and I'm a better parent for doing this, and I'm a better peer for doing this, and I'm a more aligned human being. So yeah, I totally resonate, with feeling like, the world can be against you sometimes for these decisions. But, coming back to this idea of living in alignment with your values and with what works for you. I just wanted to say that.
Nice. Before we jumped on today, Dominique and I had a little preliminary chat this week about content and bibs and bobs we would talk about, and I feel like this is going to make a nice thread. So this is for us that are here present and anyone else that might watch this later. We were saying, okay, so maybe the people that are chatting to us are already quite self-aware, can tell when their body is giving them different signs to say, you're off track, can give them signs to say, oh yeah, this feels good. And that's a daily practice, right? Like no one's ever on their balance point all the time because we're constantly being pushed and pulled internally and externally. But we thought, all right, well, what would be some good aspects of lifestyle or health to keep an eye on, to know how we're tracking in terms of being in alignment, for to use that phrase. And the things that we came up with were sleep and focus and digestion. And I also added to that the menstrual cycle, just considering that a lot of the people that are here or witnessing this are going to be women that menstruate. So, and whilst it's not fair to sort of go, if my sleep is off, that's my fault for not being better, because we've all got different challenges. Mel's got a young child, so Mel's relationship to sleep might be totally different to mine, who I just have a greyhound that sleeps all day. That's my child. Easy. And there's more little faces popping in as well. But that these might be some good pillars of health to at least be observing and going, I don't even know if I'm in balance at the moment. Okay, all right, let me check in on sleep. Am I having a difficult time falling asleep? Am I having a difficult time staying asleep? How do I feel when I wake up? Do I wake up crisp? Do I wake up and my eyelids feel like they have bricks tied to them? Does it take a long time for the fog to lift? If I don't have coffee, can I not start my day? Am I having a lot of night sweats? Am I having a lot of hectic dreams? What's going on with my capacity to rest, and how might that be influencing the rest of my well-being? And we can go deeper into these, but these are just some broad brushstrokes. My ability to focus, which is probably really related to how rested I am. If I'm not rested, everything's just I'm going to be in a daze for the whole day. I'm sure you've all had that feeling before. But how is my capacity to be present? I guess focus and presence is similar. How is my capacity to be present to the thing that I'm with at the time that I'm with? Or am I there and my mind is fragmented into a million different pockets of time and space? What's my capacity to be where I actually am? Digestion, I talked about that a little bit before. What's happening when I eat? Do I get super sleepy as soon as I've eaten a meal? Does my belly bloat and get painful and distended? Am I having difficulty with my bowel movements? Are they irregular or incomplete or painful or stuck or really loose? I mean, it's an intimate conversation, but it's such a good barometer of how the rest of the body is working in harmony. And then because I'm really interested in women's health, I added to that the menstrual cycle, because for women that are bleeding, I mean, a month can go by like that if you bleed, if you have that real textbook 28-day cycle, but some of us have shorter or longer cycles. The bleed is such a good report card. Many people call it that, this report card of, okay, well, what was going on for me last month? Was I super stressed? Was I sick? If anyone has had COVID or has had a fever, that can definitely affect the cycle. Was I not getting enough sleep? Was I in a lot of emotional turbulence? How's the state of my blood? Have I been eating enough food? A lot of women don't eat enough because we live in that culture of thinking we all have to be thin, and there's another rabbit warren there. How nourished is my body? What's going on? Is it painful? Am I in distress in the week leading up to my cycle? Does my mood take me to a place that feels really unstable? And then watching those pillars as time goes by as a way to check in with self, because only you will know when you are feeling more grounded and in alignment. But we thought that these were some nice things to check in on for self. If you are watching this and if you are in this group right now going, okay, well, all that's great. Yes, in harmony. Yes, pay attention to what I'm eating, but I'm really not sure where I'm at. How can I have something to measure this by as we move forward? Do you want to add to that, Dominique? Because you came up with those first three.
No, other than them just being really great, I like to think of my sleep, my digestion, my focus or presence, and Karina added, man, I can't believe I didn't even think of that. Goes to show the relationship that I have with that. Note to self, better look at that. But those four things, I think it's really helpful to think of them as compass points, because again, I started off earlier today talking about how easy it is, definitely with Ayurveda, because as you step out and step out and step out, the constellation of Ayurveda just becomes infinitely more complex. And speaking for myself, one of the big mistakes that I made early on was going straight to the really complex mechanisms and trying to figure it out that way, which was just, it just doesn't work. So instead of tying ourselves up in knots about what I think I'm kapha vata dosha, what should I be eating? And we do still need to get back to talk sort of more broad strokes about what foods are good for the seasons. We haven't forgotten about that, and we've still got time. But what's more important than getting caught up in your dosha, or what you think is your dosha, because most people wouldn't have a clue, is to keep an eye on those 4 compass points. And that's just how I'm going to refer to them, because I quite like that. So those 4 compass points of how am I sleeping? How am I digesting? Please remember that we don't just digest food, but we're also digesting our experiences. Everything that comes into us through our senses needs to be digested. So sometimes if the sleep is being impacted, it's actually a result of some undigested emotional and mental impressions. Yeah. So that these 4 compass points really tie in very beautifully together. And if I'm not digesting very well, I'm not going to have a lot of fluids, a lot of good tissues for a good, healthy cycle. Yeah, menstrual cycle. And regardless of whether you are, in the part of your life where you are having a regular cycle, all of those hormonal fluctuations are still very much affecting us, well into crone age. So that's going to impact on our menstrual cycles, and all of that's going to affect our ability to be present, our conscious presence. So I think that if one of the key takeaways from today is everyone going away and just becoming more mindful of, how am I sleeping? How am I digesting? How do I feel my hormones and my cycles are? And how is my focus? Letting those 4 compass points inform your choices and just keep you a bit more tied into that relationship, I think is a really great takeaway. I'd be chuffed if everyone came away with that. Does anyone have any questions on any of that?
I just wanted to comment that, like, I used to be really in touch with that, but I'm forced to listen to that stuff right now, being in the late 40s. Sleep is like something that's so easily upset with hot sweats, like 2 glasses of wine, there's no sleep at all, and so on and so forth. So, it's like I spend a large amount of my time focusing on that stuff because it's so easily knocked off balance right now.
Yeah, it's the double-edged sword. On one hand, the ease of youth. You can just go, as Karina said, you can just go whipping that credit card out, spending left, right, and centre without not realizing that we have to pay those debts later on. And the double-edged sword is that on one hand, it's these issues get forced, our hand gets forced, our consciousness is sort of forcibly turned to look in that direction, but that's also exactly the direction that we should be looking. So yay. Maybe we should go in one of those directions and either talk about food or sleep, or where do you guys want to head with the conversation?
I reckon.
Melissa.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Go, Athena.
Go, Athena. Oh, hold on to that question, Athena. Melissa, what were you going to say?
One of the interesting things that I've noticed since sort of after becoming a mum is, I guess, how much my cycle is affecting my energy. And yeah, that's just, maybe it's a function of just understanding more about that whole process of what happens in a woman's body. But yeah, I think that's an area that I'd really love to explore a little bit more about. Yeah, and just there's a little bit more pain in my cycle these days than previously. And what's really interesting is that I didn't have a bleed for a really, I guess, like stressful pitta sort of late 20s era of my life. And when I started getting it back, that's when, you know, that coincided with my time exploring yoga and being more connected and mindful. And I felt great at that time. And I think maybe that's, you know, why I was able to get pregnant. But yeah, sort of just coming back to now is just, I'm really interested in how to work with my own cycle, because I do notice, like the week before, that I am a little bit cranky, and I warn my partner to be like, it's coming, it's like 5 days until my next bleed, so just beware. Like, you know, maybe help out, you know, at home, or just let me sleep in for one of these days, that kind of thing. Yeah, so anyway, that's just an area of interest.
Beautiful. I think Karina is much more well equipped, having just done some amazing study with someone who specializes with that. But just before we do that, Athena, can you just let us know your question?
I don't know that it was it's kind of a question. It was more of a statement just feeding into Mel. So, I'm on the other end of the menstrual bit. There is no menstrual bit anymore for me. But one of the things that I wish I'd known more about was, particularly in my early 40s, I'm 57 now, but when I was in my early 40s, I remember I didn't know a lot. I mean, I knew a lot about the body, but I wasn't attentive to particularly the adrenal glands and how much impact they had on energy levels. And when I was in my mid-30s, I was trying to get pregnant and trying to have a baby. And I just recognised that it was a really strange sort of, internally, my body was very, very different. I became more averse to eating certain foods, certain alcohols. Like, I'm totally allergic to sulfates now. I literally can vomit if I drink wines that have high levels of sulfate in them. So, and friends of mine who are in their 60s, so I did have a lot older friends when I was in my 30s and 40s, 30 years older, who used to say, oh, yeah, you'll find your body just becomes a little bit different about food. And I kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to it, but it kind of made a lot of sense. It makes more sense now, but I wish I had known a lot more about the impact of food on the adrenal glands and how that impacts on the hormones and mood and your yin and yang, basically. So I think it's more of a statement, but I just think it's an important element of body, particularly for women, to be attentive to, because I don't think it's quite clearly explained by the conventional Western doctor, who wouldn't kind of draw any attention to that, really, unless you go inward and work it out yourself. So what you're describing, Mel, was not dissimilar for me. So during menstrual cycles, when I was younger, sleeping long periods of time, removing myself from, yang situations, not uncommon, but just understanding that as a younger woman at that time, maybe in the 70s and 80s, it was a bit different. I mean, there was probably less of this kind of conversation being overt in the community. But yeah, I just wanted to say something about the adrenal glands. I just think that had I known more about that and looked into that more so, I think I could have been more attentive to I guess rectifying some of the things that kind of made me uncomfortable physically, but also emotionally as a younger woman.
Beautiful. Athena and Melissa, thank you very much. I feel like you presented us with this beautiful bookend question, and still sort of tying it back, because the adrenal glands live on top of the kidneys. So I think Karina can speak to that really beautifully.
And then we'll talk about food. So when we talk about a yang lifestyle, it's so much better equipped for a male body with their hormones, because women's hormones are just not great in a fast-paced world. When women release adrenaline, they release testosterone as well. So there's this huge spend from the adrenal system when we are high-paced, trying to keep up when we're stressed, whereas men's hormones work so differently. And I do a lot of BBT tracking with my clients, which is where you take your temperature every day and you graph it. It's nice and simple, but you can clearly see on a woman's chart if she's had a stressful day, a late night, if she's had a couple of drinks or a bottle of wine or whatever she wants to have, a fight with her partner. You can see her temperature spike or dip quite a lot. And because women's hormones are constantly changing throughout the cycle, they're just, I feel like in a very yin way, women are kind of built to be more yin and men are built to be more yang, because that's just another example of duality and how we come together. Women's hormones are much better suited to a slow paced release of effort rather than 45 minutes of CrossFit and nothing but coffee all day, and then I'll have dinner and working my ass off, and it just affects the yin and the blood of the body. And I mean, you can do that, but then it can show up sometimes later when people want to start having their family and they're like, okay, now I want my reproductive system to be on board with, I'm approaching my fertility in the same yang way I've approached my career. And the body's like, hey, we've got a little bit of rebuilding to do because we've really pushed it here. And that's no one's fault. That's the world we live in. But yeah, my point being for you, Mel, is that stress is a massive factor when it comes to hormones being affected in a woman's body. And this idea in TCM of winter being time of replenishing, and maybe this is a good segue into foods, is that they talk a lot about the foods of winter being about foods that really nourish the yang and the yin and the blood. So typically for us, that's animal proteins, which is tricky for people that have a plant-based diet. I don't know if we've got scope to talk about that, but they talk a lot about beef and lamb and chicken as the building blocks of how we build more reserve in the body. Bone broths and the bone connection as well. Dominique talked about bones earlier. In Chinese medicine, the kidneys govern the bones. There's a nice Western medicine connection there where if you are anemic, or if the body senses that there's not enough oxygen in the blood to do whatever it is that you're doing, often this gets kicked off when people are climbing in high altitude, is that a particular hormone in the kidneys will kickstart the long bones in the body to release more stem cells to then become red blood cells. So the kidneys and the bones have a massive connection. So with kidney deficiencies, we see things like, so if someone's born with a congenital kidney deficiency, we'll see things like weak bones and weak teeth, weak hair, as more of a jing or an essence deficiency, which is very much connected to the kidneys. But yeah, this idea of the bones being that deep yin structure of the body, very much governed by kidney energy. So it makes sense that we will be taking really good care of the tissues in our body if we are being really measured with our efforts. And that's kind of like what Dominique said before about coming away from drama or extremes, because extremes doesn't have to be Wim Hof. I don't know if we've got time to talk about that today, but I think extremes is also massive bursts of stressful energy. I used to live with my very good friend who worked in the arts, And when she would get gigs doing makeup and hair, they were these intense couple of weeks of work. And then after that, there'd be this huge crash and recovery, and her poor nervous system would have to recoup. But because it was very financially important to say yes to those gigs, she was just riding these highs and lows, and I could see it having a massive impact on her health. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that we could talk about in there, but kind of slow and steady. All the texts talk about slow and steady. Middle path, tortoise and the hare fable, slow and steady. And finding some way that you can rebalance your nervous system. Small plug for Dominique. The most recent time that I had a moment of going, oh, wow, I haven't been here for ages, was when I did Dominique's 4-week pranayama not long ago. That using the breath in that way, being guided, having a very particular way of managing your breath, be it counting or holding it or doing particular things with it, and getting that absolute still point. Finding some way that you balance your nervous system is really important for good menstrual health, I think, because we're all dealing with the aftermath of lockdowns as well. Don't forget, like if you're in Victoria, Melbourne, we had some of the most brutal lockdowns ever, and we're really seeing it now as people try and re-enter. There's a lot of unprocessed grief and stress and story that's coming out, and we're not even really going to know how that looks in the future. So finding some way to balance the nervous system is, I think, a good takeaway from this as well today. Yeah.
Amazing, Karina. That's all so spot on. And you know, it's really interesting. Anthony, my beautiful, sometimes beautiful, mostly beautiful partner, his family have a history of something called thalassemia, which, and I've only just this second made a connection, Karina, and I've got goosebumps all up and down my left side. They all, the people in his family that are impacted by this genetic condition, they all have terrible problems with their bones and their teeth, and are on dialysis. So that connection, it's so beautiful to connect the dots. I was asked not long ago what yoga means to me, and I assume that we've all got some connection back to yoga here as well. And to me, yoga is relationship. Yeah, it's our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to the people in the world around us, and our relationship to the divine. And it's only when we have these beautiful opportunities to have community, which has been so sorely missing over the last 2 years, that you have the chance to make those connections. And so thank you, Karina. That was bloody brilliant. What should we talk about next?
Tell us what you think we should eat. Oh, you go, Kate, and then.
Yeah, Kate.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Just seasonal food. Great.
Okay, and look, I think we have a tendency. We have a tendency to sort of really want to overthink and overcomplicate things, and the key word is seasonal. Yeah, because eating strawberries in Melbourne in winter, our bodies actually aren't particularly equipped to digest that. So, in a nutshell, Ayurveda views diet a lot through the lens of tastes. Or rasa. Rasa is a word that means many, many things in Sanskrit, but one of the things that it means is taste. And the tastes that we should all be favouring, the tastes that we should all be favouring during all of the stages of winter, except as we get to the end. So this is especially for early winter and midwinter. So where we are right now, we should be favouring sweet, sour, and salty tastes. Karina touched earlier on what that salt element does. It draws things down. Salt helps us to retain, to hold on to moisture, and supports the development of our tissues. The sweet taste. Now, when I talk about the sweet taste, I'm obviously not talking about processed sugar, but naturally sweet foods. Sweet foods are tissue building foods. And this is what this time of the year is all about. Now, the sour taste promotes liquidity and fluidity. So you just think about the sensation in your mouth where, my son is going through a stage where he really likes these sour lollies, and that they're actually just atomically sour. Just thinking about it makes the, that feeling, that I get it sort of at the back of my jaw, and your mouth starts feeling watery. Yeah. So the sour taste encourages that fluidity. Yeah. So we should be favoring foods that are naturally sweet, sour, and salty, and eating seasonal and local. And I think that that's great advice on so many levels. If you're concerned about the environment, if you're concerned about all sorts of things, supporting local farming is always a good idea. And introducing foods that are a little bit heavier, a little bit oilier, and incorporating a little bit more protein. Bone broth is just so amazing. So apologies to the vegans and the vegetarians listening. I'm sorry, but Ayurveda is not a huge advocate for certainly veganism and not even vegetarianism necessarily, but there are other things that I'm sure you can do. But starting to incorporate more bone broth and more protein, but in a soupy base. Yep. So not eating a dry steak, but having slow cooks with gravies, and all three of the Ayurvedic texts talk about meat, soup, and grain preparations, and cooking your grains for a little bit longer or in a little bit more water is great. Melissa, one of the things that I used to find really helpful when Emerson was much younger and I knew I needed to get bone broth into him, was cooking his rice in bone broth. Sneaky. And things, things like root vegetables, really, really helpful. When it comes to good fats and oils, ghee is the superhero of every part of the year. It is just it's tridoshic. So you don't need to overthink it. It nurtures all of the three doshas and is just so incredibly healing and anti-inflammatory for the gut and the microbiome. Did you know that whenever she starts a sentence using those words, you strap yourself in? But did you know that the key nutritional component of ghee is something called butyric acid, which is exactly what your microbiome uses as fuel? Yeah. So, and people that suffer from seasonal affective disorder this time of year, we need to be taking care of the microbiome. That's where all your serotonin, and I only just learnt this recently, your dopamine is stored in the gut, close to 90% of it. So if you're feeling depressed, or if you're feeling like you're got up and left, yeah, what's happening in the gut? And ghee and bone broth are just so nurturing, anti-inflammatory, microbiome, supporting foods to eat, and not just eat, yeah. When you're looking at getting good oils into you, get it into your mouth, but it's a really great seasonal practice right now to put ghee in your nose and your ears and your eyes. Yeah. But just something Lana will know all about this, having done some training with me. Karina touched earlier on cold invading the body. Yeah. Ayurveda and yoga look at the 9 gates of prana. I love you too, Lana. The 9 gates of prana. So these are the prime gates that prana enters and exits the body. You've got 2 down below. I'll leave those to your imagination. And you've got 7 above: mouth, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears. So if you are concerned about conserving your prana and protecting your prana, which we should always be cognizant of how we are spending it. But if you're wanting to really protect yourself this time of year, practices like nasya, oiling the sinuses, if you have vata type issues like tinnitus and ringing ears, or you're having problems sleeping or problems with your concentration, I can't tell you how much a little bit of warm ghee in your nose, in your ears, can help. And also in the eyes. Yeah, one drop of ghee in each eye, and then you will sort of, the world will look a little bit like it's the lens has been Vaselined for a while, but it's amazing, especially as you get older, it's amazing how readily your body just absorbs the ghee. It's actually absorbed very, very cleanly and quickly into the body. And so if I know, for example, that I'm going to go on a long walk. It's whale season here on Phillip Island. Karina and I were chatting about it before. And so getting outside is really important. I want to see these beautiful creatures. But before I go outside, ghee in the nose, ghee in the ears. And if I'm feeling a little bit charged after spending too much time on the computer, or too much time in the dryness of artificial heating indoors, it's amazing. And the bottom line is it's completely natural and it can't hurt. Yeah, we're talking 2-3 drops of ghee into the back of the nose. I use one of Emerson's plastic medicine syringes or medicine droppers, so that I can actually, I've got it right here. This is the one that I use. It's just and I actually keep my ghee. I keep it all in my desk drawer because I'll stop and have little breaks while I'm using the screen. And it's great because you can stick it, as far back into the nose as possible and just plop, plop. And it was really great for Emerson when he was much younger and couldn't do jala neti. We would put a little bit of ghee in the back of the nose. And when he was breastfeeding, if he had anything happening, a bit of breast milk squirted into the back of the nose. Amazing. But I digress. So just to remember that ghee is good to put it in your mouth and in your belly, but there are other uses for it there as well. What does TCM say about food in winter, Karina?
Oh, well, I just want to say that I think I've dabbled a little bit in Ayurveda and I've learned a little more in TCM. And I think one of the really beautiful things that Ayurveda has that Chinese medicine doesn't really talk about is the oiling of the body, whether it's ghee, whether it's sesame oil, whether it's coconut oil, depending on, again, season, dosha, age, what you need. And it's such an important thing for health. So yeah, you're right. For me, wind is a real issue for me. If I go out on a windy day, thinking about what you said before, how it disturbs vata, I was like, oh, I would call that liver chi stagnation. That's probably the same thing. I would put a little bit of oil on my skin to act like barrier to protect me from the wind getting in. But that makes total sense about it being in the ears and the mouth. I guess that's why people do some oil pulling as well, not just to clean the mouth, but to protect the mouth and the nose and the eyes. Whereas Ayurveda doesn't have acupuncture, although someone did tell me that in its origins it does.
It did. It's been lost. Yeah, I think it was you and I having a conversation a while ago. It's Ayurveda did used to have acupuncture. Svoboda was talking about it in session, I think, a couple of months ago. But that knowledge in the Ayurvedic realm has been lost over time. So yeah, sorry, Karina.
I guess I said before, Same thing, soupy, well-cooked, warm foods. What's seasonal to the area that you're in? So I guess for us here, it's things like, and I will say to people, if you really must have a salad, chuck some root veggies in the oven, roast them up. Maybe it's parsnip, pumpkin, beetroot, potato, sweet potato, and then you can have a warm salad. So if you do want to put some leafy greens in there and the oil that will already be on those root veggies once they've roasted, that's a nice compromise rather than something straight out of the fridge. You never really want to have anything that cold straight out of the fridge anyway. You want to let it come up to room temp. But yeah, essentially, soups and stews, swap out your cold smoothie in the morning, forever, jokes, just for now, and think about a warm breakfast. You know, some people still kind of have breakfast cereal with cold milk. And I put it to them, hey, would you be open to trying porridge, having some oats, and just see if you notice how it makes you feel, any changes to your bowels. That feeling of warmth going into the belly is quite nice. And then the addition of spices in the wintertime that are really warming. This is particularly for people that do feel the cold a lot. You know, dry ginger, cinnamon, even grating ginger, putting a little bit of grated ginger on breakfast porridge is, whoa, you'll feel that. Belly will be toasty as, yeah. I think that's it. Just making sure that food, I mean, the idea of cooking the food is so that your body doesn't have to use that much energy to cook it. It's already pre-cooked beforehand. And there's this argument around enzymes, that if you're eating raw food, there's a higher enzyme component, which is true. And the enzymes are supposed to be great for digestion. Bob Flores, who's a really well-known Chinese medicine practitioner, I think he's published hundreds of books. Blue Poppy Press is his publishing house. He doesn't practice anymore. He's now kind of moved into monkdom. He did an interesting study. I don't think there were a lot of people in it, but he was just trying to explore that idea of raw versus cooked, where they took a cooked carrot. So obviously when you cook things, the enzymes in that food will change. They'll be altered by the heat, and a raw carrot. And the result was that whilst the enzyme quantity in the carrot is higher if it's raw, the enzyme quantity that was actually absorbed into the body from the cooked carrot was higher. So just because something's got a higher nutritional profile doesn't necessarily mean that the body has enough heat to catalyze it and absorb it. Which is why sometimes for my clients, if they've got chronic bloating and terrible digestion, I will get them to take digestive enzymes, because it helps to bring that spleen yang, that kidney yang to the gut that their body isn't able to create. And it generally has a very quick effect. So warm cooked foods is important for that reason, rather than I just have a salad for lunch and a yogurt. And cold milk on my cereal in the morning. So yeah, you can kind of figure out what you want to have around that. But yeah, they're the sort of general ideas: warm cooked, nourishing meat.
Beautiful. And just a couple of other things that sprung up while you were talking, Karina. Coming back to women's well-being, I came of age in the 80s. And that was a time where fat was really demonized. And I grew up in a household that was low fat this and low fat that, and we now know that it's like super important to incorporate good quality fats into our diet. So just coming back to Melissa and Athena's beautiful direction that they took us to, don't underestimate how important those oils are to keep the gears of the hormone machine greased and going. And also just coming back to Karina's point about cooking foods, and for me it was a real light bulb moment when I understood that, yes, Karina's example, the enzymes in a raw carrot may be higher, but what is bioavailable to us from the cooked carrot is very different. The same is quite true with fruit. as well. So just remember that the fruits that are available, it's interesting, you know, the food that we should be eating right now are the foods that become available or harvested late winter and autumn. Mother Nature's sort of preparing, and nuts, preparing and offering up the bounty that should be sustaining us throughout winter. And what Ayurveda says about fruits is that they should be either enjoyed on their own, or if you're going to have fruits, for example, like a porridge, then you don't grate raw apple into the porridge, but rather stew the apple along in with the porridge. And Svoboda, my teacher, has this really great thing that he says is like, the differences get resolved in the pot. Yeah. And I love that, because it's just such a clear image, and it really is what happens. So cooking is a process that is very pitta. It is pitta. Pitta means that which transforms. Vata means that which moves. Pitta means that which transforms, and kapha means that which holds, or that which coheres. So when we put fruit through the cooking process, we really transform its qualities. So an apple's a great example. When you look at a raw apple, it's very cold, very crunchy. So, you know, cold apples not very helpful for Vata, but a cooked apple is heavy and sweet. Its natural sugars are concentrated, so is really Vata pacifying. I beg your pardon. So whenever possible, please, you know, making sure that with fruits, they're either eaten alone. Wintertime, it's better to have them cooked or stewed along with whatever it is that you're eating. And just to come back to those three primary tastes that we should be favouring right now: sweet, sour, and salty, but naturally sweet. So good naturally sweet foods, all of the grains. Grains are naturally sweet. Oats, rice, that sort of thing. Foods that are naturally sour. So those apples and pears, they've got a sort of sweet, sour quality to them. And naturally salty foods, like cooking seaweeds, adding seaweed to your soups and stews can be really useful. Yes.
Yeah, it's good. Great.
Can I just ask about how much ghee would, maybe I won't ask how much you have a day, Dominique, but how much would you recommend someone has per day?
The bottom line, this is a universal answer for whatever the food or the substance is that you're asking about. And before I answer your question, I want to just share with you a really beautiful key idiom from Ayurveda. Ayurveda says that everything in creation can either be used as a food, a medicine, or a poison. Everything has the potential to be food, medicine, or poison. And how it affects us will depend on our relationship to it. Yeah. So for example, coffee is very medicinal, but provided you have a healthy, balanced relationship to it, and it's taken in appropriate amounts. So what is your relationship to it? I don't know why I just wanted to share that with you, but back to ghee and to answer your question. Whatever it is food-wise that you're looking at, how much should you have? Have as much as you can digest comfortably. Yeah. Now, for someone who is very Vata, who has a high affinity with Vata, and as we get older, we can generally tolerate a little bit more ghee. Whereas if you have very sluggish digestion, you don't want to put too much ghee into your system. So what I find is I have probably about 2 tablespoons a day, and I'll get people to start off with 2 teaspoons and then build up to a tablespoon and see how they go. But it's not just coming into me via my food. And one of the questions I get from people is, well, how do I use ghee? Like, what do I do with it? I'm glad you asked. So the way that I started working with ghee was just to substitute any dish, any butter anywhere, just swap that out with ghee is such a good place to start. It's got a really beautiful nutty sort of aroma and flavor to it, and is really appealing and appetizing to most people. So start there, and ghee has a really high smoke point. Yeah, so it's great. Anything that needs really hot oil to cook in, ghee is a very stable, great oil to use in your cooking. And remember too that your body is digesting any ghee that goes onto or into your skin. Yeah, so when I say 2 tablespoons of ghee, it is, I would say, 1 tablespoon a day that I take internally in my food. If I'm taking any herbal preparations in a herbal tea, there's always a teaspoon of ghee that goes in there as well. But then another tablespoon will go into my varying myriad gates of prana. There will be ghee that goes in there somehow, some way, shape or form. I'll save that for my OnlyFans. But but yeah, so Kate, start off just substituting butter. Try and cook with it wherever you possibly can. Speaking of porridge, our favorite breakfast at the moment is steel cut oats. Now, steel cut oats, they take a long time to cook. So if you can absolutely just use rolled oats because it's much faster to prepare. But our favorite breakfast, we use whole milk. You can use whatever you like. You can use water, but we use whole milk, and we prepare steel cut oats with we're a bit heavy handed on the spices in our house. We use cinnamon and ginger. Nutmeg and cardamom are also lovely additions to this winter spice mix. Yeah, but Emerson doesn't dig the cardamom, so I don't put it in our family porridge. And grated pear and grated apple go into this as well. It's just divine. And then when you're ready to eat it, we always put a teaspoon of ghee in the porridge, and it is just so good, so good. So yes, I offer that to you. And Kate, just start slow with the ghee, 1 to 2 teaspoons, see how well you tolerate it. And yeah.
I've been having recently, and it's my God meal per day, I've got my hands on this ceremonial cacao. And so, you know, they say prepare it with intention and drink it with intention, but I was been putting a teaspoon of ghee, a teaspoon of tahini, a date, sometimes a bit less than 1 whole date because it's a lot in there nutritionally. I think that's it. And the cacao. And I was just getting worried that I might have been overloading myself, though digestive-wise it's been fine. And that's my afternoon snack lately.
Beautiful. And Kate, keep in mind, I already know this about you, that your affinity to pitta is really high. You have a really higher affinity with pitta. So one of the good things about having that good affinity with the fire element is that we can digest a little bit more ghee. Whereas if you were very kapha-genic, again, ghee is not going to aggravate kapha. It's not a matter of aggravating. It's more that you just don't necessarily digest it as efficiently. Yeah, so that sounds perfect.
What was that product? Sorry, I missed what that was called.
I bought this ceremonial cacao, so it's raw, like raw chocolate, and it hasn't been
cacao.
heated.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the word. My apologies. That's all right. I'll get you now. And what are you doing with it?
I'm turning it into a drink, so somewhere close to a tablespoon or slightly less of the chocolate. I zhuzh it up with a little bit of hot water, and a half to 1 day teaspoon of tahini and a teaspoon of ghee, and I
Right.
put oat milk because that's my milk I like to have, and make a hot drink out of it.
So I totally misunderstood. I thought you were talking about a vegetable, and then I didn't hear the word, but I get it now. That's an interesting concoction.
It is, but it's really yummy and it fills you
Sounds
up.
good. Yeah.
Well, look, on that note, it looks like we have just cruised right into our end time today. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation, everybody, and Dominique. Thank you for coming along and participating. We look forward to doing these regularly. We'll definitely be doing more before the year is out. And yeah, thank you for participating and being present. And also thank you for those of you that are watching this after the fact. We've got a couple of things we wanted to let people know that are upcoming, little developments from both of us. And so I fully appreciate that it's right on one. If you are interested in hearing about that, you're welcome to hang back. If you've got to go, we totally get it. And we thank you and hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.